There is a very special moment in the day, but most of us overlook it. It is not the morning when you set goals. It is not the daytime when you try to control everything. It is the evening, right before you fall asleep. When the lights go out, your shoulders stop being tense. The outside world gradually grows quiet. At that moment, the tired ego lets go, and the unconscious begins to speak. Carl Jung believed that sleep is not only for rest, it is a doorway. What you carry into that moment does not disappear in the night. It quietly sinks deep into the mind, touches the place where habits are formed, where fears are nurtured, and where tomorrow's self is silently being created. You may not notice it, but the state you are in when you go to sleep often determines how you wake up. If you sleep in busyness, the next morning your mind feels heavy. If you sleep in tension, the whole day passes in exhaustion. Just one thought at the end of the day is enough to change the direction of your emotions and your actions. So before going to sleep, what should we think about? So that every morning we wake up, life no longer repeats as it used to. Stay until the end, because that small thing could be the beginning of a change in your entire life. Number 1, when the ego lowers, the unconscious begins to speak. Night is usually not loud, but it is when the mind talks the most. Not in clear words, but in vague feelings that keep you tossing and turning. A day may pass very fine. Everything gets done. Every role is carried through. Yet as soon as you lie down, the lights go out inside you. Suddenly, there appears an uncomfortable emptiness. Not exactly sadness, not exactly worry, just a sense that something is off, something you never touched during the day. That moment reveals an important truth. In the daytime, you live by one part of yourself, and at night, another part begins demanding to be heard. That part that lives in the daytime is the ego. The ego helps you survive in this world. It teaches you how to behave properly, think reasonably, keep emotions at a manageable level. Thanks to the ego, you can work, communicate, and not get pulled too deeply into inner chaos. But the ego is also a very strict controller. To maintain a stable image, it has to push aside what does not fit. Emotions that make you feel weak, desires that make you doubt the path you are on, thoughts that shake the image of, I am this kind of person. None of it disappears. It is pushed down below. In the daytime, you rarely notice that life is busy enough, that you do not have to turn inward. Work, responsibilities, sounds, information continuously cover the mind with a layer of noise. But at night, as energy gradually runs out, the ego no longer has enough strength to maintain absolute control. It does not collapse, but it lowers. And at that moment, the unconscious begins to have space to speak. According to Carl Jung, the unconscious is not a dark part that must be eliminated, but the foundation of the entire psychological life. It contains what you have never fully lived, never fully understood, never allowed yourself to become. In the daytime, the unconscious is covered by social roles. At night, when those roles temporarily fall away, the unconscious begins sending signals, not to disrupt, but to restore balance to who you are. A very clear example is people who are always seen as strong. In the daytime, they handle work neatly, rarely complain, always appear to control everything well. But at night, when they lie down, they struggle to sleep. There is no specific incident. Nothing new has happened. Yet inside, there arises a heavy feeling, sometimes emptiness. From Jung's perspective, that is not a paradox. It is a sign that the ego has been working too long, while other parts of the person have been neglected. In the daytime, they exist very well. At night, The unconscious reminds them that merely existing is not enough. The unconscious does not speak in logic. It does not analyze, argue, or explain. It speaks through feelings, through fleeting images, through old memories that suddenly return without warning, and if you do not pay attention, you will easily brush it off and assume it is just fatigue. But Jung believed that those moments are where the unconscious can reach you most clearly, because then the ego no longer has enough strength to distort the message. Jung once wrote a very famous sentence: "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." He did not say the unconscious is something terrifying. He pointed out that if you are not aware of what is operating inside, you will live under its influence without realizing it. You think you are choosing, but in fact you are reacting according to patterns formed a long time ago. The moment before sleep is when those patterns are most likely to show themselves. In the daytime, the ego is like a thick pane of glass, allowing only proper thoughts into consciousness. At night, that glass becomes thinner, and what was hidden begins to appear, not clearly, but enough to make you uneasy. Imagine the mind as a lake. In the daytime, the wind blows constantly, and the surface is always rippling. You only see the moving surface, and think that is the whole lake. But when night comes, the wind gradually calms, and the surface becomes smoother. That is when you begin to see what lies beneath, not because the bottom suddenly appears, but because for the first time, the water is still enough to reflect. The unconscious is the same. It is always there, only when the ego lowers. Do you get the chance to sense it? What matters is understanding that the unconscious does not appear to make you weaker. It appears so you can become more whole. Jung believed that people truly mature only when they dare to acknowledge both the light and the dark parts of themselves. But in the daytime, we rarely have the inner space for that. Only when you stop trying to maintain an image, stop straining to be fine, can the unconscious reach you honestly. Many people think the moment before sleep is when the mind is most fragile. Jung saw it the other way around. He believed it is when the mind is most real, when you are no longer on guard, when you are no longer performing, when you are no longer rationalizing everything, and therefore, what appears then carries far deeper meaning than daytime thoughts. If you continually ignore this moment, you will keep living, keep working, keep maintaining familiar habits, but the unconscious will still quietly steer you. It affects how you react in serious situations. It repeats old patterns in relationships. It makes you feel as if your life is moving along a familiar trajectory, without you understanding why. But if you begin to realize that when the ego lowers, the unconscious is trying to say something, you are standing at the first door to a profound change. This part does not ask you to solve every problem immediately. It only lays the foundation for an important awareness. Transformation does not begin with daytime effort. It begins with the ability to listen. When you are no longer in control, when the ego lowers, the unconscious begins to speak. And if you are quiet enough to hear it, you are touching the silent starting point of changing your life. Number 2, what you carry into sleep will follow you into tomorrow. When you understand that the moment the ego lowers is not weakness, but the moment control stops being central, you begin to notice something even deeper. The night does not end your day. It extends that day into another form, quieter, more subtle, but also far more persistent. And within that extension, your state of mind is carried farther than you think. Before sleep, you are no longer alert enough to edit yourself into what is right. You no longer have the energy to convince yourself that everything is fine. You no longer are playing the role of the strong one, the positive one, or the understanding one. Your state is not arranged, not rationalized, and according to Jung, the unconscious takes in that very state as a foundation. Sleep, therefore, does not erase what you just lived. It carries it into the next day without needing your permission. In the daytime, consciousness can temporarily set many things aside. You stay busy so you do not have to think. You stay rational so you do not have to feel. You keep going so you do not have to stop. But the unconscious does not operate on a later basis. It does not divide life into separate pieces. For the unconscious, everything is one continuous stream. What has not been emotionally closed does not disappear when you close your eyes. It only retreats deeper and continues to influence you when you wake up. That is why many mornings begin with a very familiar feeling. That is hard to name. Nothing specific has happened, but your heart already feels heavy before the new day truly begins. And there are other mornings when you find more room to breathe, even though the circumstances are not any easier. That difference does not come from the new day. It comes from the state you carried over from the night before. Night and day are not separate. They flow into each other continuously. In analytical psychology, Jung emphasized that the unconscious does not overlook what has not been fully processed. A thought you set aside during the day because you were too busy does not vanish when you sleep. It simply moves to a deeper layer, and from that deeper layer, it continues shaping your emotions, your intuition, and how you respond to the world when you wake. You may not remember what you thought before sleeping, but you will feel its aftertaste throughout the day. Jung once wrote a very famous and also very accurate sentence. The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. Dreams, in his view, are a small door leading into the deepest, most private part of the soul. But that door does not lead to something foreign. It leads you into what has already been present. A dream does not create a new state from nothing. It continues processing the state you carried into sleep. And whether or not you remember the dream, the work of the unconscious continues, leaving traces in the emotions of the next day. There is a very important point that is often misunderstood. The unconscious does not classify states as good or bad by moral standards. It does not judge. It only registers what is familiar. If you often go to sleep in tension, the unconscious learns to operate in tension. If you often go to sleep with a sense of lack, the unconscious treats lack as the baseline state, and the next day it continues maintaining that state, not to make you suffer, but because that is the environment it has become familiar with. This is exactly why many people feel their lives repeat. In the daytime, they try to change. They set new goals, adopt new thoughts, act differently. But at night, they still end the day with the same old feeling, and the unconscious, loyal to what is familiar, continues guiding them back into the same rhythm of life, not because they do not try hard enough, but because they are working at the surface level, while the roots are still being fed every night. You can imagine the unconscious as a quiet process that runs when everything else has settled. In the daytime, you only see what is on the surface: actions, words, decisions. But when night falls, what lies underneath continues to be rearranged, not in a hurry, not dramatically, but very steadily. And what it uses as its main material is the last state you leave behind before sleep. Therefore, the practice here is not forcing yourself to think positively or trying to do it right. Jung did not believe in suppressing or avoiding emotions. What you need to do is simply take a few minutes before sleep to create a truly quiet space. No phone, no distractions. In that space, note just one thing. What state is present inside me right now? If you can name it, anxiety, exhaustion, emptiness, calm, or a mixed feeling that is hard to describe. Naming it is not about control. It is about letting the inner state be seen exactly as it is. This action may seem very small, but from Jung's perspective, it carries great meaning. When a state becomes conscious, it begins to lose its silent power over you, not because it disappears immediately, but because you are no longer carrying it unconsciously. You are no longer letting it automatically decide how you step into tomorrow. You can see this as a way of closing a day with awareness, rather than letting the day close you. The difference is not whether today was good or bad. It is how you cross the boundary between night and day. When you do this long enough, you will notice your mornings gradually change, not because life changes, but because the inner current has been adjusted. Sound. Music softens. Pause 3 seconds. The moment before sleep, therefore, is not the end of a day. It is a very quiet beginning of the next day, and in that quiet point, you are planting something into your life, night by night. Number 3, darkness appears only when you stop distracting yourself. From the moment you stop trying to carry a certain state into sleep, stop trying to fix yourself to be more fine, stop avoiding the feeling present inside, something very special happens. No immediate relief, not peace, but darkness. Thoughts you do not want to think. Emotions you once called negative. Parts of you that in the daytime you always try to sidestep. And what matters to understand is this. The darkness does not come because you are weak. It comes because you have stopped distracting yourself. In the daytime, distraction is the most common survival strategy of modern people. Work follows work. Screen follows screen. Sound follows sound. Each time an uncomfortable feeling rises, you immediately find something else to think about. Not because you are shallow, but because you have learned to exist that way. Distraction helps you avoid facing things. And in many cases, it is truly necessary for you to keep living. But at night, especially in the moment before sleep, distraction is no longer easy. The space quiets down. The body slows down. The things that used to help you run away no longer have the strength to pull you outward. And when you stop running, what you left behind begins to catch up. Jung called that part the shadow. In analytical psychology, the shadow does not mean evil. It is the collection of parts excluded from consciousness, because they do not fit the image you have built of yourself. Emotions you believe are bad, thoughts you believe you should not have, aspects that make you feel ashamed, weak, or contradictory. In the daytime, you do not see the shadow because the light of busyness is too strong. But when that light turns off, the shadow is not something newly appearing. It is simply something that, for the first time, is no longer hidden. Jung once said a very famous sentence, and it is also very easily misunderstood. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. He did not say you must sink into darkness. He said maturity does not come from focusing only on the positive. It comes from daring to make the dark part conscious, because what you do not see is what has the strongest power to control you. A Greek myth that reflects this very clearly is the journey of Psyche. She was not pulled down into the underworld because she was weak, but because it was part of the cycle. Only after spending time in the world below did Psyche become a queen, rather than remaining an innocent girl. Myth does not tell the story to frighten people of darkness, but to remind us that there are parts of maturity that only happen when we dare to step into unfamiliar regions of ourselves. From the perspective of modern science, there is also an interesting parallel. When the brain is no longer continuously stimulated by external information, the brain's default mode network begins to operate more strongly. This is the system related to self-reflection, memory, and self-perception. In other words, when you stop distracting yourself, the brain automatically turns inward. And what gets processed in this state is often not the most pleasant things, but the unresolved ones. So darkness does not appear when you think negatively. It appears when you are quiet enough to hear what has been overlooked. And for that reason, many people fear silence. They fear turning off the music. They fear lying still. They fear doing nothing. Not because they are lazy, but because deep down they know that if there is no distraction, they will have to face something. A comparison may help you picture this more clearly. In the daytime, the mind is like a room with bright lights on, and people coming and going constantly. You do not notice the dark corners, but when night comes, the lights go off, the room becomes empty, and those corners do not disappear. They simply become more visible, not because they are more dangerous, but because there is nothing covering them anymore. What Jung emphasized is not that you must dig into the shadow by force. He did not encourage self-torment or sinking into negativity. What he spoke of is stopping. When you stop distracting yourself, the shadow appears on its own. And when it appears, what you need is not to drive it away, but to acknowledge it. No judgment, no rushed interpretation. Simply recognize. This too is a part of me. The shadow often takes the shape of feelings you once avoided. Envy, resentment, fear, a sense of not being enough. In the daytime, you may push them away with reason, but at night, they do not need a reason to be there. And if you look long enough, you will realize behind every shadow, there is a need that has not been heard, a part of you that has not been acknowledged. Many people mistakenly think that facing the shadow will make them worse. Jung saw it the opposite way. He believed that not facing it is what makes the shadow dangerous, because when it is pushed into the unconscious for too long, it does not disappear. It only finds ways to express itself outwardly through behavior, reactions, and choices. You do not understand why you keep repeating. When you stop distracting yourself, the shadow does not appear to punish you. It appears to be integrated. It wants to be brought into the light of consciousness, where it no longer has to control you from behind. And the moment before sleep, when everything slows down, is when you have a rare chance to do that. This part does not ask you to solve the shadow immediately. It only sets an important awareness. If you feel uncomfortable in silence, if you feel anxious when doing nothing, it may not be a problem to fix, but a message to listen to. Darkness appears only when you stop distracting yourself, and when you dare to stay with it, even for a brief moment. You have begun to enter a deeper layer of understanding yourself. Number 4, the last image of the day, shapes the person you wake up as. And when you are quiet enough to stop running from your own darkness, when you stop filling the night with distraction or avoidance, something else begins to happen. Very subtle, yet more influential than you might think. The mind no longer processes only scattered emotions or memories. It begins to hold on to an image, not an image in the purely visual sense, but an inner image of you, of your life, of how you exist in this world. And that final image, right before you fall asleep, is what shapes the person you wake up as the next morning. Carl Jung believed that the human mind does not operate mainly through logical language, but through images and symbols. Daytime consciousness likes to analyze, explain, and name things, but the unconscious does not speak through reasoning. It speaks through images, And the moment before sleep, when consciousness is tired, the unconscious has the chance to place in you a background image. That image does not need to be clear, does not need to be specific, but it carries a very distinctive feeling. Who am I when everything settles down? Notice this. Before sleeping, what image do you usually carry about yourself? A person who is always one step behind life. A person who is not good enough. A person who is trying but tired. Or a person who is learning to accept themselves, even with many things still incomplete. You do not need to answer out loud. The unconscious has already answered for you, by leaving a background image in the mind. I know a friend who is very good at his job, trusted and praised. In the daytime, he is always in a controlled state, solving problems quickly, speaking very calmly. But he once said that every night before sleep, a very familiar image always appears in his head. He is standing alone. Behind him is a long stretch of road already walked, and ahead is a haze with no clarity. There is no tragedy, just a very slight loneliness. He did not pay much attention, thinking it was just fatigue. But the next morning, he always woke up with a quiet feeling that he had to carry everything himself, that he could not rely on anyone. No one taught him that feeling. No event created it during the day. It was shaped by the very last image he carried into sleep, repeating night after night. From Jung's perspective, this is not random. The unconscious uses images to create what he called an attitude toward life, how you stand in life, how you see yourself in relation to the world. The last image of the day is like a negative template. When you wake up, every new experience will be printed onto that template. That is why two people can wake up in the same circumstances, but respond completely differently, simply because their inner background image is different. Jung once wrote, "Dreams are impartial, spontaneous products of the unconscious psyche, outside the control of the will." A dream, in his view, is not a temporary emotional reaction, nor is it something we consciously create. It is a spontaneous product of the unconscious, appearing when the will no longer controls. Therefore, the images that arise in dreams, or right before sleep, often do not speak about what we think we are feeling, but about the real position we are standing in within our inner life. And precisely in the moment before sleep, when layers of interference gradually withdraw, those images can appear most clearly, with the least noise. You can imagine this like setting a photo as your phone wallpaper. During the day, you open dozens of apps, read all kinds of information, watch all kinds of content. But each time you return to the home screen, the background photo is still there. You may not look closely, but it is always present. The last image of the day in your mind is the same. It does not occupy all of consciousness, but it is the background on which all other thoughts appear. What is notable is that this image is not always negative. There are people who, even under great pressure, still carry a very different image before sleep. They are walking slowly but not lost. They do not know the exact destination, but they know they are moving. The next morning, they wake up not with big excitement, but with a steadiness that is hard to explain, not because they think positively, but because their inner background image is no longer stuck. It is movement. Jung believed that deep psychological transformation does not begin by changing circumstances, but by changing the inner image. When that image changes, the attitude toward life changes with it. And what is interesting is that you do not have to imagine a new image in a forced way. More important is recognizing what image is automatically appearing each night, because that is the image the unconscious is trying to say something about you. The last image of the day is often very simple. It may be only the feeling that you are always chasing, or that you are standing still, or that you are shrinking back. But precisely that simplicity gives it a powerful influence. The unconscious does not need complex stories. It needs a symbol strong enough to represent your state of living. And when that symbol is repeated long enough, it becomes normal in the way you see yourself. If you wake up for many days in a row with the same familiar feeling, it may not be because life is not changing, but because your last image of the day has not changed. And Jung would say, there can be no true awakening if the unconscious background image stays the same. In this section, Jung did not believe in self-hypnosis with fake positive images. What he emphasized is making the existing image conscious. Recognize it. Stay with it. Ask quietly, what is this image saying about how I am living? When an image becomes conscious, it begins to shift. Not immediately, but enough that you are no longer shaped by it in a vague, blind way. The last image of the day, therefore, is not only a product of fatigue, it is a very honest mirror, reflecting your relationship with yourself. And the person you wake up with each morning is not random. It is the person shaped from that image, repeated, refined day after day. Number 5, each night is a silent step on the journey back to yourself. By this point, you may have begun to sense something very different from how we usually think about change. Life does not turn in a new direction just because of one big decision, and it does not transform only through daytime efforts. What truly shapes who you become over time lies in very quiet, very small moments, repeated so often you no longer notice them. And each night, when you close a lived day, you are stepping onto such a journey, the journey back to yourself. Carl Jung called this journey individuation, the process by which a person gradually becomes themselves. Not the version most accepted by society, but the most whole version. Wholeness here does not mean perfection. It means no longer being split, no longer living only by the part allowed to appear in the daytime, while the rest is pushed into the shadow. And what is very important is this: the journey does not happen through force, but through permission. Permission to stay with yourself, especially in the moments no one sees. In the daytime, you are forced to face outwardly. You react to the world, adapt to circumstances, hold your role in relationships. You have to be someone. But at night, when roles fall away, when there is no one to impress or please, you have fewer reasons to keep performing. That is when the person behind the roles has space to breathe. And each time you allow yourself to end a day without running from the feelings left behind, you are moving a little closer to your real self. Sound. Pause. 4 seconds. Music softens. This journey is not loud. There is no sense of victory. There is no clear milestone to say, I am done. It is like walking in fog. You cannot see far. But each step takes you away from the old point. And each night, whether you are aware of it or not, you are still walking. The question is not whether you are part of the journey, but whether you recognize that you are on it. Carl Jung himself is a very clear example of this. After separating from Freud and already achieving fame in the scientific community, Jung entered a period of deep inner crisis. In the daytime, he was still a respected scholar, but at night, he faced dreams, images, and emotions so intense that even he was bewildered. Instead of suppressing or avoiding them, Jung chose to stay with what appeared at night. He recorded it, drew it, and dialogued with his inner world. Those experiences were later recorded in the Red Book, not as a scientific work, but as a map of the journey back inward. Jung did not escape the darkness in one night. He moved through it, night by night. That shows a very important truth. The journey back to yourself is not a journey upward, it is a journey inward. And the deeper you go, the more you realize you do not need to become someone else. You only need to stop moving away from yourself. Modern psychology also looks at this from another angle. The deepest integrating processes of the mind do not happen when people continuously stimulate the brain with information, goals, and action. They happen when the nervous system is allowed to slow down. When it no longer has to react, the brain begins reconnecting parts of experience that were separated. Sleep, and especially the minutes before sleep, is the natural environment for that process. Not to fix you, but to bring your parts back into one whole. Jung once wrote a very short sentence that goes straight to the core of this entire journey. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The privilege of a lifetime for Jung is not success or recognition, but becoming yourself. And becoming yourself is not adding something new. It is gradually removing layers that are not yours, removing roles worn too long, removing images you used to survive, but that no longer reflect who you truly are. Each night, when you lie down with no one to prove anything to, no goal to achieve, no question of what do I have to do next, you move a little closer to the part of you that does not need to perform. That part may be very fragile. It may not know how to speak clearly, but it is real. And it is the repetition of these very real moments, night after night, that creates the biggest change. Not changing your personality, but changing your relationship with yourself. Many people think an inner journey must be tied to complex methods, elaborate exercises, or intense awakening moments. Jung saw it differently. He believed the most important thing is not technique, but steady presence. Staying with yourself long enough to stop fearing what appears and sleep in the most natural way creates that space for you every day, without requiring you to do anything big. You do not need to understand yourself completely. You do not need to resolve every inner conflict. The journey back does not demand perfection. It demands honesty. Honesty with the feelings left after a day. Honesty with the last image you carry when you close your eyes. Honesty with the distance between the person you are living as and the person you truly are. The practice for this phase is very simple. Before sleep, place one hand on your chest. Breathe evenly, and give yourself a few minutes to stop. Feel the breath rising and falling under your hand. Feel the body being present. No need to adjust your state. No need to reach anything. Just stay still with what is present, whether clear or vague. That full presence in silence is already a small but real step on the journey back to yourself. You may not see results right away, but over time, you will begin to notice very subtle changes. You respond more slowly to things that used to hurt you. You strain less in familiar roles. You no longer need to prove so much that you are fine. You begin to feel more inside life, rather than just running through life. Those changes do not come from daytime determination, but from the integration happening at night. Each night, therefore, is not an escape from life. It is a return to the part of you that does not need to be fixed, only to be acknowledged. And when you begin to see sleep this way, you will no longer see it as emptiness. You will begin to see it as very quiet, very steady footsteps on the journey back to yourself. Not loud, not showy, but deep. Enough that at some point, you realize you are no longer as far from yourself as you used to be. Perhaps by now, you have realized something important. Your life is not truly decided by what you do in the daytime, but by how you end each day. The moment before sleep when every role falls away, when there is no need to prove or control. You stand closer to your real self than at any other time. And that moment, repeated long enough, quietly shapes the person you wake up as the next morning. Carl Jung did not see change as a loud breakthrough. For him, transformation is a quiet process in which consciousness gradually learns to listen to the unconscious. Each night, when you stop distracting yourself, stop running from the feelings left behind, you are allowing the neglected parts of you to return. And when the real self is present long enough, life cannot help but change direction. You do not need to think of anything grand before sleep. The only thing you need to carry is honesty. Honesty about the feeling that is present. Honesty about the image that is in you. Honesty about the distance between the person you are living as and the person you truly are. Jung believed that this honesty, not positive thinking or strong willpower, is the foundation of a whole life. If this video made you pause and think, press like to support the channel. And if you want to continue exploring deeper perspectives on the mind, the unconscious, and the journey back to yourself, do not forget to subscribe to accompany the next videos. Sometimes, just changing one thing before going to sleep is enough for life to begin to change.